Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Davies. I'm the Executive Director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University. I also had the privilege of serving as the Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at Ohio State. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to think about the conversations between the girls, the women that we are seeing today, and to hear the comments and descriptions of life experiences from women like Tara McBride. Sometimes we forget that there is more that stands between women and fair treatment, equal opportunity, than the kind of explicit discrimination that we have heard about, particularly from women like Tara McBride today. We really need to focus as much attention these days on the research that describes new impediments, unknown largely impediments to women's opportunity and fair treatment. And a lot of that has to do with unconscious biases rather than explicit discrimination or known biases against women. This research is now decades old, and I want to encourage you all to learn about it if you haven't explored it yet. It is actually quite easy to be introduced online to some of this research about implicit biases. This man, Anthony Greenwald, decades ago constructed an implicit association test that really was the catalyst for a number of other research studies that would show us a lot about unconscious biases against women and then unconscious biases against many different kinds of identity expressions that we could be focused on. If you haven't taken the implicit association test, I encourage you to go to Project Implicit online. Take the implicit association test for race, for example, or for gender, or for ageism, and what you will see there may surprise you. What we know from hundreds of thousands of these tests now being taken online is that, for example, for race, it is much harder for most participants to put together black faces or black names, sounding names that appear on a computer screen with positive sounding words than it is to put them as quickly together with negative sounding words. We also know that these participants on average have a quicker ability to pair white faces or white sounding names with positive words than it is to pair them with negative words. When it comes to gender, the implicit association tests have shown that participants have a greater or quicker ability to pair words like follower with women's faces or women's names than they do words like leader. We have for many decades now tested explicit stereotypes and biases against women. Back in the 1930s, participants in polls like those done by Gallup would be asked questions like, if there was a qualified woman running for office, would you vote for her? In 1936, only 30% of Americans answered that question yes. Today, the same question generates typically close to 100% of people answering that question yes. That means that we have really achieved an enormous amount when it comes to fighting explicit prejudices against women. And even though that's true, we still know from our experience that women have a harder time being elected into public office. We know that when participants take the implicit association test, they have a quicker ability to connect words like executive and president with male names, and a quicker ability to pair words like assistant and aide with female names. All of this starts at a very early age, a disturbingly early age, unfortunately. So when you think about the two young women that we saw on the stage just a few minutes ago, Annabelle and Momtaz, in their conversation, we might think about studies with very young school-age girls that show us that from a very early age, girls are already able to pair words like math more quickly with words like boy or boys' names than they are to pair girls' names with words like math. How early does that start? One study of school-aged children in the first and second grade showed very clear implicit associations between boys and math and girls and other things like reading. So when I had a conversation off stage with Momtaz earlier this morning, and I asked her what was her favorite course, and she said science, I was very happy to hear that and encouraged her to continue to pursue that, because the truth is, without her even being aware of it, she will be exposed daily to all kinds of signals that math is not, or science is not, for girls. We have to begin to work on implicit associations, implicit biases to turn that around. Now, does this matter in the real world? We can see all kinds of signs that this matters in the real world. Someone had the bright idea that this was a smart thing to put on a girl's t-shirt and was sold for a short period of time at JCPenney's until that store received enough outraged calls that it took it down. But this is very real, and it affects women as they grow up and decide what they want to do with their lives. The implicit association tests for gender show very clearly that most participants have a quicker ability to pair words like female or female faces with words like family, nurturing, and words like male or male faces with words like career and salary. This has encouraged additional studies, such as one that was done with a group of faculty at a research institution like Ohio State. The faculty at this university were asked to participate in an evaluation of a resume. Hundreds of faculty were given resumes. They were identical resumes except for one difference: the name on the top of the resume. Half of the faculty had the resume with the name Jennifer on it, and half received resume with the name John on top. And they were asked to answer several things. One was to rate the competence based on what they saw in their resume. One was to assess the hireability of the person. One was to answer whether or not they would be willing to mentor this person. And finally, what starting salary would they offer this person given their credentials? The results of this were stark and clear that the resumes that had the male name on top of it, John, were rated higher in competence and higher ability. The participants were also more likely to be willing to mentor John than Jennifer. And when it came to starting salary, you can see from the graph behind me that the starting salary for John was significantly higher than what would have been offered to Jennifer. And the distressing news is that those answers were answers that were given equally by the women participants in that study as the male participants in the study. So does this show up in the real world? Do we have to believe that the problems of the 1930s with explicit sexism is what we have to face down today? I don't think so. We have a much bigger culprit, unfortunately. Finally, we know just from the conversations that we witnessed today that women do have a number of identities. We straddle lines. Some of us straddle racial lines. Some of us straddle lines with respect to gender identity, gender expression. And implicit association tests tell us that there are a number of biases that present additional difficulties for women who have implicit biases affecting them across multiple lines. The Shooter studies, which focused mostly on the difference in the ability to decide whether in a video game to shoot or not shoot a person that pops up on the screen who could be holding a wallet or could be holding a weapon, that it was quicker for participants to decide not to shoot a person holding a wallet or an innocent object when that person was white than when that person was black. And also that more mistakes were made in deciding to shoot when the person who was holding an innocent object was black. Additional studies that relate to women of color show us that as women allies, we have a lot of work to do to fight the impacts of implicit biases that our sisters of color have to deal with every day. Some of you will have seen the most recent videotape of the police officer in the school in South Carolina manhandling this young African-American girl when he was making her arrest. Some of you will remember not long ago, as a nation, we were thinking about the treatment of Sandra Bland and the decision of a police officer to make her arrest for the traffic violation, which ultimately precedes her death in that jail cell. We have a lot of work to do, and unfortunately, not all of it relates to our conscious commitments to be fair it is more difficult than we believe to be the fair, egalitarian women and people that we want to be. So I encourage you all to learn as much as you can about the research around implicit biases so that we truly can, in our sisterhood, come together and do all that we would want to do to support opportunity for all women. Thank you very much.